One mistake found to be made by the Mistress was the reason why this $1 million murder plot was uncovered. This is a killer with a lot of privilege, a lot of money, and a lot of arrogance. Why exactly did he kill his in-laws? How much did his accomplice really know? And was his wife involved? You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I am Brooke Makenna. I am so happy you are here. This is the Genuine Gem community if you haven't ever been here before, and we love to focus on the victims and the survivors over the monsters and the perpetrators. And so if that's something you would like to do as well, please join our community. You can also sign up for the Genuine Gem newsletter, which is where I personally can send you my videos. One of my favorite things to remind you guys of is to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough. That's a reminder that even I myself need to hear, and it's something that, especially in this genre that we talk about, it is so incredibly important to remember and to encourage others to use their voices and to come forward. So let's go ahead and dive into the Serafini in-law murders. A quick thank you to our sponsor, Raycon, who allows me to continue to create these videos. You guys know that I love Raycon. I've used them for years to edit and to do my work, but also just for on the go. It's like taking my dog on a walk. They have the best headphones of all different kinds at an affordable price, which is the best part. But I always like to upgrade my supplies for work, kind of like I did with going back to school, except for now it's just for work tasks. So headphones are definitely one of those things. So I've been wanting to try the Essential Open Ear headphones from Raycon. They're actually so lightweight that you forget that you're wearing them. And one of my favorite parts is that you can still wear these and feel safe when you're out and about. With these, you can not only hear what you want to perfectly well, but you can also hear everything happening. The Essential Open Earbuds actually have this flexible hook that is perfect for fitting snug into your ear and staying on. These earbuds can last for 36 hours and they automatically connect to your device or even to multiple devices. I've tried so many of Raycon's styles and I love every single one of them, and you can go ahead and get 20% off site-wide at buyraycon.com/BrookeMcKennaOpen. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 2021 and 70-year-old Robert Gary Spohr, as well as his wife, 68-year-old Wendy Louise Wood, lived in Lake Tahoe, California in their home on the lake. They had been married for 45 years by this time. They had grown daughters who were Adrian and Erin, along with their dog named Maggie. They were very close with their daughters and their families, and in fact, on June 5th of 2021, Erin and her two sons, who were quite young at the time, were visiting the grandparents for that evening. So the grandsons were actually down by the lake with the grandparents playing for a while, but then by about 7:35 p.m. Erin took the boys and they decided to head out. So grandparents Robert and Wendy, Robert actually went by Gary, so we'll call him Gary. Gary and Wendy went inside their home. They started to kind of get ready for bed to rest. They were said to go upstairs and kind of be lounging on the couch, watching TV, getting ready. And that is what is believed to have happened, because the next time anyone knew what happened to them was when the paramedics arrived at their home. Placer County Sheriff's Office had received a 911 call about an hour later, but the dispatcher could not get anyone to answer. They could hear someone almost gasping for air, and they immediately sent paramedics to the scene to assess what was going on. So the North Tahoe Fire Department was actually the first on the scene, and they would discover Gary on the second floor on the couch near the fireplace and the TV, and he was deceased by a single gunshot wound to the head. Wendy was then found in the upstairs bathroom nearby with 2 gunshot wounds to the head. Somehow, though, she was still alive. She was the one who had called 911, but she was in such dire condition that she could only actually tell them her name and nothing else. She was rushed to the renowned regional medical center in Reno, but her husband was declared DOA. Deputies found shell casings and bloodstains on the couch upstairs where Gary was found. They would discover that 6 gunshots had been fired in total from what they believed to be a .22 caliber gun. Deputies were searching the area for any footage that could lead them to a suspect. They observed all the CCTV from around Hurricane Bay, which included a beach, a popular bike path, and Highway 89. Now, there were said to be many drivers, cyclists, pedestrians who would come along this area to get a view of Lake Tahoe. But it was also 2021 amidst the nationwide pandemic, so many people were at home and they weren't out and about as usual. So it was a pretty quiet area. Now, this is when they would find footage where they would see a figure walking up a nearby bike path to the home in the late afternoon of June 5th. Now, this was around 3:30 to 5:30 p.m., hours prior to the 911 call coming in. This figure was wearing a backpack, a black hoodie, white jogger pants, and a white mask or neck gaiter covering their face. Of course, this was the pandemic, so this was quite normal. This is something that wouldn't have caused suspicion. But after walking along this bike path along Westlake Boulevard, they were seen walking southbound from Tahoe City to Homewood, which is where their home was located. And that's where they crossed the highway and began jogging up the driveway into this neighborhood of luxurious homes right on Lake Tahoe. They entered the one belonging to Wendy and Gary. Next, investigators would watch this masked figure enter that home, and they did not emerge for hours. After fast forwarding through the footage, it was found that the figure did not end up leaving until after Erin and her sons had actually come and gone. And the masked figure would then leave shortly after the 911 call was placed. The figure could be seen going northbound on Westlake Boulevard from Homewood back to Tahoe City between 8:30 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. They were leaving destruction in their path. So the sheriff's office decided to release the surveillance footage to the public, asking for help in identifying this individual. Detectives believed that the shooting was planned and premeditated, but they had a few leads. They found no prior suspicious activity in the area, no break-ins, no burglaries, no sign that anything was stolen from this home, and no sign of forced entry the day of the murders. They believed the killer knew the victims. Now, Gary and Wendy, they had lived at this home for about 20 years at this point. They had met way back in college and had raised their two daughters. They were business partners in real estate. They loved traveling together in their free time. They were said to love each other deeply. They even lived in Afghanistan and Hong Kong before settling down in California in 2000. They had actually chosen Lake Tahoe due to Wendy growing up nearby. This was her dream location to live, so they built their home. But now, Wendy was fighting for her life in an intensive care unit, with that home being the location of her attack. She was going to need to relearn to eat, talk, and walk due to her brain injury. Meanwhile, detectives were trying to find a motive. They were diving into business dealings with real estate for this couple, and they were unable to find any records or any emails or conversations that seemed to point to anyone who would be a threat. They were at a dead end in this investigation, and they had been asked by the family to cease contact with Wendy as she recovered. She had survived, but barely. And so by November of 2021, detectives searched family homes, and they didn't find any guns that matched the bullet casings inside of the crime scene. So all of this was a combination that led to the case going cold for the next 8 months. That was until February of 2022 when Wendy and Gary's daughter Adrian held a press conference at their home. She announced that the masked gunman entered her parents' lakefront home and shot them both. But they were reaching out to the media in Reno, Tahoe, Sacramento, and the Bay Area as they believed the shooter could have driven from any of those places. They were also offering an $150,000 reward for information identifying this killer. Now, the Placer County Sheriff's Office also said that they had identified a person of interest, but they were not revealing the name at this time. Adrian said she believed that her parents' dog, Maggie, actually woke Wendy up after she was shot and fell unconscious when she was on the floor. She had said that she had suddenly just woken up and not known what had happened, and that's when she was able to call 911, which ultimately saved her life. Adrian said their dog Maggie was relentless, and she believed that she licked Wendy until she woke up. She believed that's why her mom survived. Adrian said, "My mom is the strongest person I know. She survived something that no one is supposed to survive, and it is her iron resolve that she has had her entire life that got her out of this house on June 5th. But her mother spent an entire month in the ICU and weeks in rehab, and she had no memory of the attack. Her mother couldn't just relax or even grieve her husband's death because she still needed protection from the unknown killer if this was a targeted attack." Adrian stated that the biggest impediment of her mom's healing was not knowing who did this to her and her husband of 50 years. So the family was asking for anyone in the area to look at photos and videos they may have taken that day for clues. Adrian said the only piece she had is that her dad died instantly, and she hopes that her mom never remembers, even if that means never finding the killer. Unfortunately, a year later, Wendy Louise Wood would lose her life to suicide. Her daughter said that she simply could not handle the loss. She missed her husband like crazy, and Adrian hoped that when her dad's killer was brought to justice, they would be held accountable for both deaths, as they were very much responsible for both. The two daughters of Wendy and Gary were given their parents' property, including the Lake Tahoe home, and they shared everything. But there was still a murder unsolved. And on April 21st of 2023, a year and 10 months since the murder, the Placer County Sheriff's Office confirmed new developments in this case. They released that they believed suspects may reside in the Reno area. But nothing more was revealed about this case until the 2-year anniversary on June 5th of 2023. In a shocking discovery, Adrian had filed a lawsuit alleging she knew who did it. Adrian alleged that her sister and her husband were responsible for the death of her parents, and she was seeking damages of over $25,000 for their wrongful deaths. Adrian's sister, who was Erin Serafini, was married to Dan Serafini, a former Major League Baseball player. He was drafted out of high school to be a pitcher, and he went to the Minnesota Twins, Chicago Cubs, San Diego Padres, Pittsburgh Pirates, Cincinnati Reds, and Colorado Rockies. Now, his last pitch was actually in 2013, but in 2008, he had moved on to playing the Mexican League, and around this time, he had started Throw Like a Pro Baseball Academy, and he also owned a bar called the Oak Tavern with his new wife, Erin. Dan and Erin had 2 sons together. 2 months after this lawsuit from Adrian saying that her sister and her husband had murdered her parents, her sister Erin then filed a lawsuit against Adrian, alleging that her sister was manipulating their mother prior to her death into disinheriting her from the $10 million estate that their parents had, and that Adrian had facilitated their mother's suicide. She said her sister exercised undue influence over their mother while she was vulnerable, and accused her sister of isolating her mother, abusing her, and diverting all family assets for her own benefit. Erin said that Adrian quit her job and schemed to exclude her from the inheritance. She said she influenced Wendy to make Adrian the sole beneficiary of the entire $10 million inheritance. Erin wanted to reinstate her parents' 1999 trust, which stated that there was an equal split between the sisters. But only 5 months after this, on October 20th of 2023, the Placer County Sheriff's Office announced they made arrests in the Homewood homicide of Gary Spohr and the attempted murder of Wendy Wood. This was the arrest of 49-year-old Daniel Serafini and not his wife, but 33-year-old Samantha Scott, both of whom were known to the victims and to each other. Prosecutors theorized that Dan had targeted his in-laws to get access to the family trust, that he was lying in wait inside of their home. But Dan was also charged with child abuse and endangerment because his own sons were present in the home prior to the shooting. Dan ended up being arrested in Winnemucca, Nevada, and Samantha was arrested in Las Vegas. Adrian was shaken to her core by these arrests. She had theorized that her brother-in-law and her sister were involved, but she stated that her parents were so generous to Dan and Erin throughout their marriage. Yet Erin continued to uphold her husband's innocence, and there were no charges filed against her. But who was Samantha Scott and what was her involvement? Well, Dan Serafini's life wasn't just notable due to his career. It was also due to the scandal that ended it and what could have been seen as the beginning of the end. So you see, while pitching in Major League Baseball, Dan had actually tested positive for steroids in 2007. He was suspended from playing about 50 games, and his career was kind of said to go downhill after that. While he made around $14 million during his career, he would soon divorce his first wife, and he would lose some of that money in the divorce, as well as getting into bad investments and failed businesses. He was said to then ask his parents, who were Joe and Sandra Serafini, to give him a $240,000 loan because he was out of money. And the only way they could do that was if they took out a loan against their own home. So they did so for their son, who opened the Oak Tavern bar with that money. This was around 2010, the same time that he met his second wife, Erin. They married 2 days after his first wife filed for divorce. And even though she had come from a wealthy family, it wasn't the end of the financial troubles. You see, back in 2015, when Erin and Dan had their bar 6 years prior to the murders, they had gone on a TV show called Bar Rescue. Now, this was called the Take Me Out to the Bar Game episode, and the focus was getting the staff under control who were spending too much money and to help him before he sunk deeper into debt. He told producers he lost his $14 million and he was $300,000 in debt. On the show, Dan was said to be losing his temper, getting physically violent towards employees, and his wife Erin was even interviewed, and she spoke about how hard it was seeing him struggle and that his personality had changed. Now, Erin was a horse trainer, and she was said to be not making much money doing so. Dan also could not keep a job or the restaurant afloat in these years following baseball. He was said to be partying when he wasn't working, and at the time he actually got a job at a gold mine, but he wasn't making enough to get himself out of debt. Yet they continued to live this very lavish lifestyle in a $1.1 million 5-bedroom property in Reno, where their 2 sons were often watched by their nanny, Samantha Scott. It was stated that Erin and Dan were relying on her parents to keep them afloat. So Adrienne, her sister, believed that they were financially motivated to kill Wendy and Gary, and that Erin was an accomplice, luring her parents out of the home that day so Dan could enter and wait for them. But what role did the nanny, Samantha, have in the murder? Well, I'm sure you guessed, the affair with the nanny trope came true in this family. And Samantha Scott had been friends with both Dan and Erin before becoming their nanny. She had actually hired Erin for horseback riding lessons before working for them. Dan was said to often be partying on his off time. He used drugs. He didn't spend much time at home with his kids or his wife, but he did find time for the nanny. And the nanny was going to make the one mistake that got him caught for it all. But not just caught for the affair, but for murder. Samantha Scott pleaded not guilty after her arrest. Adrienne gave a testimony to the judge stating that she did not think Samantha should be allowed on bail. She stated she had no idea Samantha was involved, and Samantha had even stayed close to the family after Gary was murdered and Wendy was healing. She would go with Wendy to rehab. She would take them on family trips.
The judge made the right decision. Samantha Scott should not be in the community, and I think that the truth will come out. I believe that Samantha Scott is guilty. She has played a horrific role, and I wanted to be able to look her in the eyes and address her for that.
Can you speak on what you said in the victim impact statement? You talked about a vacation that you all took and that Samantha was there after that. Can you speak on that, please?
Yeah, Samantha Scott is a twisted person. She has long been my sister's best friend, and she, even after the shooting, continued to make herself present around our family, spending time around my mom while my mom was going through rehab. How sick of a person you have to be to want to look at your victim and see them struggling is beyond comprehension. It's just awful. And she stayed around, and she and my sister would come and visit my mom and watch her struggling. And it was horrible. It was horrible. I cannot thank this county enough. I mean, Placer County sheriffs and the district attorney's office have followed through. It's been 2 years and they have done an incredible amount of work. This was not easy. And to look her in the eyes and know that she's gonna be held responsible, that means the world to me. That means I felt my mom and my dad, you know, just like, you get nervous when you're about to speak, and then they're just like, you know what, look her in the eye and she will be held accountable for this.
Why do you think they did this?
I think that will come out in time. I can't speculate on that. I certainly have my suspicions, but I do think that it will come out in time. How many people stayed pretty happily married for 50 years? You know, they met in college, they traveled the world together, they started businesses together. I have a partner and, you know, we coexist and that's about it. You know, it's like to be strong business partners and in love and take risks to raise 2 kids, like that's an incredible amount of work. They were adventurous. They loved to scuba dive. They loved mountain biking. They loved Lake Tahoe. I mean, they gave back to that community so much. And I think their legacy there will be remembered. And they just had a passion for life. They really did. And that's why they were living their golden years. This was supposed to be the time that they were comfortable doing the things they loved, being retired. They had an Airstream. They wanted to travel. They had a trip planned in October, you know, and they should have been given the right to their life. I've never particularly liked Dan. As the lawsuits will show, I wasn't entirely surprised. I think that he is a bad person. I wish he had never met my sister. I wish they still weren't married. I think he is violent, and I think he is greedy, and I am just so thankful that Placer County has taken him into custody, because that's where he should be.
Do you still believe your sister may have had something to do with this?
At the moment, I can't comment on that.
Do you think ultimately that's what this is about, that it came down to money?
There's a very good chance of that, but we'll have to see when the evidence comes out.
At a preliminary hearing for Dan Serafini, Detective John Riella stated that he had interviewed Dan's former employees and family and friends, and one employee actually identified Dan in the footage as the masked man based on how he walked. This footage that showed this man walking into Wendy and Gary's home. Another witness claimed that they had heard Dan get mad about his in-laws not feeding his children and said that they were abusing the kids. Another witness stated that back in 2012, Dan had stated that he would pay $20,000 to have his in-laws killed, saying that they were wealthy pieces of shh. A month before the murders, he allegedly said he would do it himself. Prosecutors also stated that the day before the shootings, evidence was found that Dan and Samantha were checking into the Red Lion Hotel in Elko, Nevada, and the next day, Dan's truck and Samantha's Subaru were seen at the gold mine where he worked in Crescent Valley, Nevada, and he had an RV there. Samantha's phone had placed her in Tahoe City later that day. Samantha spoke to investigators saying that they went to the hotel, she slept on the bed, he slept on the couch, and that she wasn't with him the day of the killings. She was in Elko. Samantha had made mistakes. One little mistake changed everything, but there was more to come as well. You see, investigators had located CCTV footage from about 1.5 miles from Wendy and Gary's home. This showed a Subaru, just like Samantha's, parked around the block and waiting before a masked intruder came and entered the vehicle hours later. Samantha had been captured picking up Dan after he allegedly killed his in-laws, or tried to kill both of them. The defense was going to argue that Wendy and Gary were described as nightmare neighbors and the others had reason to kill them, including people with restraining orders against them at the time of the attack. Wendy was said to have attacked a fisherman outside of their home in 2018 and was convicted, and defense also planned to argue that Adrian, the sister blaming her brother-in-law, benefited financially from the parents' death as well. and that she could have been the killer, and the fact that she was currently dating a convicted bank robber. But in February of 2025, the nanny Samantha Scott had heard the evidence against her, and she pleaded guilty to being an accessory to a felony. But this was only in exchange for a plea deal where she would have the murder and burglary charges dropped as long as she testified against Dan. She was released until sentencing on house arrest. So the trial for Dan Serafini began on May 19th, 2025, and the prosecutor showed a text from Dan stating, "I'm going to kill them one day." While the defense stated that Erin Serafini received a $90,000 check from her parents that day, and there was no financial motive for Dan because they were already paying for his family. The prosecution stated that Samantha Scott would be testifying against him because they had an intense sexual and emotional affair, and it affected the lies that she told back in 2021. They continued to have this affair after she was jailed. Dan had even written Samantha letters, one stating, "I'm sorry people are wasting a year of our lives. Stay strong and fantasize daily. We will be free soon. I love you and always will." He would wrap these letters in origami roses made out of jail toilet paper. In another, he said, "I have a long reach if anyone F's with you. Stay strong. I know you're scared. I can't imagine my life without you. There are so many things I want to do with you and to you when this is over." A video was then shown to the jury of the victims' homes that day. Dan was said to grab a tissue when it showed his wife and children on the property. A bit later, at 8:51 p.m., the sound of gunshots could be heard. 5 minutes later, this masked figure left the home. Cell phone analysis revealed that both Dan and Samantha's phones were in Elko, Nevada on June 4th to June 5th. Around 11:56 a.m. on June 5th, they had both connected to towers in Crescent Valley, where Dan worked. Samantha's phone then traveled from Crescent Valley to Tahoe City, and then at 4:40 p.m., her phone connected in the West Shore area of Lake Tahoe. By 7:47 p.m. was the last connection of Samantha's phone. Now, Dan had also texted his wife on June 5th at 5:24 a.m. and then sent a TikTok to her around 11:39 a.m., hours before the attack. No other activity was found to or from Erin until he sent a message to his wife at 6:54 the next morning. That is when the witnesses who claimed that Dan had threatened to kill his in-laws testified. One was his former boss at Barrick Gold Mining named Eric Bunner. Eric testified that they were once driving around in his truck at work and Dan got a phone call. He was aggravated. He threw his phone down on the dash and he said he wanted to kill his in-laws or he wished that they were dead. When Eric asked why, he said, "They abused my kids, didn't feed them, and treated them like crap." He said, "One of these days I'm going to kill those mother effers." But Eric said he didn't go to the police because he thought he was half joking. But this is when Dan's brother, Joe Serafini, testified. He had been asked by Dan to kill his in-laws. But again, Joe thought he was joking. Dan said he would pay him $20,000 to kill the in-laws. And after Joe denied, he said, "Hey, I'll give you 20 grand if you let me kill them." Joe said that when Dan first married Erin, his second wife, Wendy and Gary had tried to sue him because Erin had dropped out of dental hygiene school. Dan was said to laugh it off, and no one ever actually filed against him. But another witness, a woman named Jennifer James, stated that days after the attack, Dan was actually showing off a new $70,000 Pontiac GTO he had purchased with a loan from Erin's father, Gary. When asked about paying Gary back, Dan said he didn't have to worry about that anymore. Now, the November 2021 interview where investigators were searching family homes, they had actually interviewed Samantha Scott, the nanny. This was shown to the jury. Detectives have gotten a search warrant for her residence and questioned her about her whereabouts at the time of the murders. When she finally admitted she did drive Dan, she said she didn't know why he actually wanted to go, and he had told her that it was for a drug deal. A detective had told her in this footage, "I don't buy that. Not to be cryptic, I'm being super honest. I think you knew about it when you drove down there. There's no way you waited 5 to 6 hours for him with no communication. No one is going to believe that." Samantha Scott, nanny, and mistress herself then testified. She had decided to come forward with the full truth in January 2025 and take the plea deal because her dog had died while she was in jail and she missed her grandmother's funeral. She said on the stand she was deeply in love with Dan and admitted to serving as the getaway driver after the shooting. She said she was stressed testifying against him, and she felt sad because Dan was her friend and she didn't want her friend to go through any of this. When asked if she still loved him, she said, "No, I don't know, maybe." When asked if she felt guilty, she said yes on a lot of different levels about a lot of different things. She said that after the interview with detectives in 2021, she met up with Dan and he was mad that she had told them about the drive. He asked her to go and change her story to say that she was meeting someone to buy cocaine. She never went and changed her statement. But now Samantha was testifying that Dan had actually told her that day that he needed a ride, and that wasn't abnormal. But he had also told her to not tell anyone about the trip, and he wanted her to remove identifiable stickers from her car, as well as get it wrapped in a different color. When he said that it was for drugs, he also mentioned reporting the Subaru stolen and keeping the payout. But Samantha was not comfortable with that, and so that's when Dan offered to pay her $5,000 for a ride if she changed her car and turned off her cell phone. Now, the night prior, when they were both at the hotel, Samantha said they were using cocaine, they were drinking, and Dan started talking about his wife, Erin. Samantha alleged Dan said that this wasn't the life that he had in mind and that he already had 2 kids from his previous marriage and that he and Erin did not want more when they first met, but they ended up with 2 more sons. He said that he was happy, but it wasn't the plan and he wanted to leave Erin when the kids were older. Samantha then said the next day she dropped Dan off at a market in Sunnyvale and then she parked about a mile from the crime scene and waited for hours. She said while she originally thought it was for a drug deal, Dan was going to pick up this package. She had seen him in the long pants, the long sleeve shirt with a backpack and a mask. And she knew that inside of that backpack he had a PVC pipe used as a silencer and had asked her to pull over on the drive there so he could test it out to make sure it was working. Dan then asked her to turn her cell phone off before they made that drive so it couldn't be tracked, and she thought she did, but she later realized it was still on. Another huge mistake from the mistress. She said hours later when he was back in her car, she informed him that she had accidentally left her phone on. Dan didn't get mad, but he did end up telling her to pull over when they crossed the Nevada border, and Dan started breaking down the gun, throwing pieces out the window of the moving car, along with the PVC pipe, clothing, and a pair of gloves. She said that she pulled off on an exit near Winnemucca, Nevada, and that Dan got out of the car and threw his shoes and backpack into the desert. Dan then got in the driver's seat and he drove them back to his trailer at the gold mine in Crescent Valley where they spent the night. Samantha said she didn't know what Dan did, but she did grow suspicious and only lied to investigators to protect him and herself. She even went back after the shooting to look for his shoes and backpack, but found nothing. She said it was only later that summer that Dan had actually confessed to her, saying that he shot Wendy twice in the head and once in the hand. But he didn't say anything about killing Gary. She said 2 months later she had gone with Erin, Adrian, and Wendy on a family trip. And when she was asked about the letter that Dan had sent her in jail that called her a ride or die, she said that it means she still has his back and will continue to tell lies. She said that she hoped that they would both just be going home. But Dan Serafini was on trial for the murder of his wife's parents, and his accomplice was his mistress, and yet his wife was testifying on his behalf. Erin Serafini said that she felt deceived by Samantha when Samantha was testifying because Samantha was being deceptive and never told her about the relationship with her husband. Dan did, but Samantha didn't. Erin also believed she was being deceitful when she said that Dan threw the items out of the car window. Erin was then shown photos of herself and Samantha side by side and how similar the two looked. When asked why she thought Samantha was so deceitful, she raised a copy of those photos next to each other and said, "This is kind of creepy." Erin had previously told a detective that Samantha wanted to be her. And when asked if Samantha idolized her husband, she said she thought that she had a little crush on him. She called her a lost, wounded puppy because she always wanted to be around them. But Erin also continued to say that her husband Dan was innocent and that she still trusted him and wanted him to be her husband. She said they often spent a lot of time apart, and she knew of these sexual relationships with the nanny, but it didn't upset her because they had an open relationship. She said, "He's been there for me. He's been a great father, great provider. He's my best friend. I don't care what he did. He provided for us. I was busy with my kids." She said when she was growing up, her father often had affairs and her mom would hire private investigators, and it was this huge thing. So she decided to keep it open with her husband, Dan. However, the condition was don't ask, don't tell, and don't get romantically involved. But she said it was when this whole case was broken open, she realized it was more than sexual with Samantha. They had even written to each other in jail about writing and promoting a book together. She was asked if she thought Samantha was trying to emulate her, and Erin said, "Well, she ended up sleeping with my husband, so I guess so." When asked if she knew they were in love, she said, "I was not aware. If he was in love with someone else, he could have gone and been with someone else." But Erin also admitted that she had trouble with her parents, Wendy and Gary, for quite a long time. She had been cut off by her mom 30 times from finances ever since she turned 18. But she also said that her mom gave her a $90,000 check the day of their attack, and her husband received monthly payments from them. Erin said there were often verbal and emotional fights between everyone, which was really her parents and her and Dan, and a lot was over money. One was over money that needed to be given for Erin's horse business, and her father had said, "We are at the point of no return. Pay attention or deal with the consequences. You brought this on yourselves." Gary wrote in another email, "All to get you funds for your dream and our nightmare." In another, he wrote to his daughter, "Erin, your behavior is disgusting. You've been terrible to us ever since you were 12. To that, Dan actually wrote in defense of his wife saying, "So help me, if Wendy lashes out at me or my family again, you will both regret it. I'm serious about the insults. It better stop. If Erin has been such a bad kid since she was 12, then you should have beat her and taught her some respect and appreciation instead of caving in." As far as her talking bad to Wendy, not sure if you have heard this coming out of Wendy's mouth, ... Now let's all quit the Jerry Springer bullshit. These emails also revealed that Gary and Wendy had loaned this family $1.3 million to help them buy their ranch. They had called Dan violent, belligerent, and called him Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. However, Erin again stated on the stand that she did not believe that this masked man was her husband. She also said she had no idea someone was hiding in their home when her and her sons were playing outside that day. But a document was then shown to the court of the postnuptial agreement between Erin's parents and Dan that said that he would not be entitled to any of their fortune after their deaths. However, another document showed that Dan would be entitled to financial benefits from a Washington corporation in which 100,000 shares would go to Erin, and if Erin died, Dan would get the shares, but only if he was still married to her. Now, this was concerning, and many question if his next plan of action was going to be the murder of his wife. But on July 14th of 2025, Dan Serafini was found guilty of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and first-degree burglary. He is yet to be sentenced, and on August 19th of 2025, Dan filed a motion for a new trial postponing sentencing. Jurors actually spoke to the news outlet KCRA3 about deliberations in this trial.
I was the one who had to sign the verdict forms, and there was a shaky moment. It's real.
And I saw Serafini, it was evil. All you saw was anger.
Testimony revealed Wood had died, but they didn't know the cause.
I was really curious. Maybe Wendy will testify, but
I was on the edge of my seat waiting for it. I was like, when are they going to call Wendy? When are they going to bring Wendy in here?
And then to later realize after the trial that she took her own life was just devastating. I couldn't find a single piece of evidence that made me stop and go, oh, maybe it wasn't him.
Wendy and Gary's daughter Adrienne then spoke out after the verdict.
It's been 4 years since my mom and dad were shot, and it's been 4 years of just hell. And the Placer County District Attorney's Office and Sheriff's Office never gave up. And today, finally, justice was served. I want to thank them. I want to thank the members of the jury for seeing what the truth is in this case. At this point, our focus is on the sentencing and making sure that Dan Serafini never sees outside of a jail ever again. Today, I wore my mom's engagement ring, and my dad's ashes are around my neck. And I knew that they were here with us today, and I knew that they wanted justice, and that's all I can say for now.
Days later, Erin Serafini filed for divorce from her husband, Dan. She was also seeking sole custody of their 2 sons, who were currently 7 and 4 years old. She is not requesting child support or alimony at the time and says that her and her husband have an amicable relationship. Do you believe Erin had anything to do with the murder? Erin has not been charged with any crimes. Did Samantha Scott, the nanny mistress, know about this murder plot? Was she more involved than we believe? And again, I ask you, was Dan's next order of business the murder of his wife? Was all of this truly due to finances? It is interesting to me that it seems like in these emails, and from what Adrienne has said about her sister Erin, Erin has kind of always been black sheep of the family, the troublemaker. It seems as though the parents had trouble with their daughter Erin. And I think that that's why a lot of people tend to lean towards Erin having something to do with the planning and the execution of the murders of her parents. But again, that is simply alleged. She has never been charged. There has never been anything, at least at this point, to connect her to that. I am shocked to hear that she did openly testify for her killer husband, who murdered her parents and also cheated on her, but kind of didn't because they kind of had an open relationship, but he didn't abide by the rules of that. And then she says, she trusts him, she still loves him, and then she goes and gets a divorce right after he is convicted. Had you heard of this case? It is a more recent case, but honestly, not a ton of creators or news outlets have covered this. Do you think Samantha Scott shouldn't have been given that plea deal where they dropped murder charges? Do you think she should be in jail at this time? Or do you think they did the right thing in order to get her to testify about the truth of that day, even though she wasn't allegedly there during the time of the actual murders? Do you think her story was even true? Sorry I have so many questions for you, but I have so many questions about the case, and I love hearing you guys down below discuss your opinions, your theories, all while being respectful individuals, especially to the people who don't have charges against them, especially to the victims and the victim's family that are left to pick up the pieces, such as Adrienne. I'm sending so much love to her. She has been a huge reason why this case has continued to move forward, and filing a lawsuit against her sister could not have been easy. And for that braveness, that boldness, she got justice for her parents. And that's why it is so important to remember what I said earlier in the video, to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough. So thank you so much for watching. Subscribe down below. I'll have playlists if you want to go and binge some of these videos. And again, you can join this community if you would like. I also have a vlog channel, Brooke Makenna Vlogs, if you want to see more of a personal side of my life. And yeah, I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.